The roar of the engine was a physical punch to the gut. It wasn't the familiar thrum of a tractor or the gentle rumble of an old truck. No. This was the guttural, metallic shriek of a bulldozer blade scraping against concrete, followed by the splintering, tearing sound of old-growth timber giving up its ghost. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, as I sprinted around the main house, my boots chewing up the grass. My breath hitched. Oh. No. No. They couldn't have. They wouldn't dare. But there it was. My grandfather's barn. The heart of this ranch for 120 years. Reduced to a pile of twisted metal and splintered wood. The sight was a kick to the chest. So powerful it sent me staggering back a step. The world tilting. A woman in a pristine white pantsuit and a perfectly coiffed blonde bob stood by. Her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Her name was Karen, head of the Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association. And her presence was a festering wound on the peace of our valley. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dripping with an icy, saccharine condescension. That structure was in violation of Section 4. Subclause C of our bylaws. Unauthorized. Non-aesthetic outbuildings. She held up a clipboard as if it were a holy relic. My fists clenched. That was my family's barn. Karen. It was here before your estates were a twinkle in a developer's eye. It was grandfathered in. My voice was a gravelly snarl. She simply smiled. A cold, empty gesture. The rules apply to everyone. Mr. Vance. It's a matter of community standards. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a face like a crumpled paper bag, averted his gaze. He had a demolition order. Mr. Vance. I had to. His words were a whisper. The air vibrated with the tension. A hot, thick thing that pressed down on us. My lungs burned. My throat was tight. I couldn't speak. All I could hear was the metallic hiss of the hydraulic arm lowering. And the final, crushing blow of 1,000 memories being smashed into dust. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the porch, staring at the empty space where the barn had been. A hollow ache in my chest. The moon reflected off the resort's private lake. A half-mile away but a world apart. It was their pride and joy. A man-made oasis bordered by manicured lawns and lakeside villas. A thought, cold and venomous, slithered into my mind. I knew the old drainage system from my grandfather's time. A network of pipes that carried overflow from the lake into the lower pasture for irrigation. He had always called it the old wellspring. A clever little trick to make use of the water. Was it still there? Had the developers sealed it off? The next morning, fueled by a single-minded rage, I found it, a small, rusted intake valve hidden beneath a clump of cattails. Largely untouched. It was a perfect, beautiful opportunity. I spent the day buying industrial-grade water pumps, hoses, and a generator. I worked until my hands were raw. Every action driven by a single purpose, to give them back the empty feeling they'd given me. Hours later, the pumps hummed to life. A low, steady thrum against the stillness of the night. The hoses, snaking across the pasture, began to pulse. A visible testament to the thousands of gallons of water now gushing into the empty creek bed on my land. It was a slow, agonizing process. A drop here. A drop there. But I didn't stop. I'd watch the water level drop a few inches and then nod. Satisfied. A grim smile on my face. Karen and her lot thought they could simply erase history. But they had no idea of the history that still ran beneath their feet. On the third morning, my phone rang. It was my sister, Lily. Her voice trembling. They're saying you're draining the lake. Chris. The news is here. They're calling it an act of sabotage. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't even considered that. My revenge had been a private act. A quiet protest against their grand demolition. But now it was a public spectacle. And the truth was about to surface. I arrived at the lake to a circus. News vans were parked on the resort lawn. Their satellite dishes pointed like antennae at the sky. A crowd of resort residents. Some angry. Some confused. Stood on the muddy shoreline. And at the center of it all was Karen. Screaming into her phone. I don't care about a fishing tournament. Greg. We have a crisis here. Her facade of calm was gone. Replaced by a frantic, panicky energy. She saw me and her face twisted into a snarl. You. She shrieked. You're a maniac. You'll pay for this. I just stood there. My hands in my pockets. A cold, hard resolve in my eyes. Funny. I said. My voice quiet but firm enough to carry. That's exactly what I said when I saw my barn reduced to rubble. A reporter. A young woman with a sharp gaze. Broke away from the crowd and approached me. Mr. Vance. Is it true you're responsible for this? She asked. Her microphone thrust forward. I'm responsible for repurposing what was always mine. I replied. A smirk playing on my lips. This water has fed my fields for generations. The HOA just decided to build their little fake pond on top of it without a thought. My words landed like a bomb. Karen's eyes widened. A flicker of genuine fear crossing her face. That's a lie. She sputtered. The lake is an independent system. Just then. An old man. The original developer. Hobbled over from the crowd. She's lying. Son. He said. His voice raspy. Your granddad and I. We had a handshake deal. He let us use the drainage for the first few years as a favor. He never gave up the rights. The air crackled. The truth, long buried, had finally crawled to the surface. It was all a facade. A cruel, selfish act of power. Karen, seeing her lies crumble around her, tried to pivot. It was still an eyesore. A public nuisance. But her words were weak. She was losing control. The script she had so carefully constructed now a pile of tattered notes. Just as the chaos reached a fever pitch, another voice cut through the air. Calm and clear. Karen. What about the fire? The words hung there. A new and unexpected twist. It was the construction foreman. His eyes now fixed on Karen. A hush fell over the crowd. What fire? Karen stammered. Her face pale. He took a deep, shaky breath. The building permit. It said, demolished due to fire damage. But there was no fire. He pulled a crumpled document from his jacket. You forged it. You needed a reason to bulldoze his barn. So you created a false narrative. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Karen's carefully crafted world of order and control imploded in a single painful moment. The look on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Her lips trembled. The clipboard, her symbol of authority, slipped from her hands and landed with a soft plop in the mud. She was exposed. Her power stripped away. She tried to say something. But all that came out was a pathetic, whimpering sound. The cameras were all on her now, capturing her spectacular downfall. The final pump emptied the last of the lake's water a few hours later, leaving behind a vast, desolate expanse of cracked mud. The resort's grand oasis was gone, replaced by a monument to vanity and hubris. I stood on the hill, watching, a strange sense of emptiness mixing with the satisfaction. I had gotten my revenge. But the barn was still gone. My sister came to stand next to me, her arm linked in mine. You showed them, Chris, she said softly. You showed them what happens when you mess with a man's home. I nodded. My grandfather always said that the true value of a man was not in what he possessed, but in what he stood for. He was right. Karen's punishment was not the loss of her resort lake. It was the loss of everything she thought she stood for: respect, authority, control. She was no longer a feared HOA official. She was just a woman caught in a lie. What she lost was her dignity. And that, I knew, was a far deeper punishment than any physical loss. The story spread like wildfire. A tale of justice served by a rancher and a few powerful pumps. My phone rang off the hook. Letters poured in from people who had also been wronged by overzealous homeowners associations. They saw my actions not as an act of destruction, but as a righteous stand against a system that often prioritizes appearance over human value. It was a story about fighting back, about refusing to be silent, and about the unexpected ways truth can emerge from the mud. It was a message that a little bit of old-fashioned grit could still stand up to polished arrogance. The lake eventually refilled. But the lesson remained. Karen moved away. And the new HOA is a more reasonable group. My barn is still gone. But in its place, I'm building something new. Something stronger. Something that will last another 100 years. This whole experience got me thinking. It's easy to see this as a simple tale of good versus evil. But is it? I took something away from them, just as they took something from me. My actions, while justified in my eyes, caused a lot of inconvenience for people who had nothing to do with it. Does the end justify the means? Or is there a better way to handle these things? I'd really love to know what you think. What's the right choice when you've been pushed too far? Is there a moral line you just don't cross, no matter how angry you are? Or is it okay to fight fire with fire? Let me know your thoughts on what's right and what's wrong.